Brook Burgh has been one of our most popular Siege presenters the past few times. I'm amazed and delighted with the number of views her presentations are continuing to get on YouTube, especially on things like Pico, which definitely opened my eyes to what could be done with that platform. So, always looking at the more interesting ways to do games, ways most of us don't think of. So, perfect topic, variance through variance, getting the most out of alternate game modes and how to build them better. Brooke, go ahead and introduce yourself and take it away.
Hi, so I'm Brooke. I'm here to talk about alternate game modes, which is by itself a pretty wide and nebulous topic, which encapsulates a lot of things, uh, and we're going to talk about how they're used and what they're good for. If we have time at the end, I'll talk about some tips for implementing them as well. I did not give a practice run for this talk, so we'll see how that goes. But first, a bit about me. That's me on the left. I work in Pico 8. Uh, Last year at Siege, I put out Pushamo, which is a tiny little arcade game where you push blocks around and try and clear blocks. I made Flags for Friends, which is a really fun, pretty game where you just make some flags for your buddies who give you silly prompts. And Overstimulated, a fun, cool math game. I am a programmer by trade, and I recently started at Blue Mammoth Games. Though for this talk, I will not be representing them. I'll just be representing myself and my own work. And I've done lots of game jams. Game jams are really fun, and they're a great way to learn things. And generally, I'm just a really awesome and cool person. My handle is there at the bottom is Beanborg for itch and for Twitter. Go follow me there. Uh, First, I just wanted to say that it's your game and you can do whatever the heck you want with it. I like to play fast and loose, as you'll soon see, because the lines can be really blurry a lot of the time, and also that kind of fast and loose behavior can help the creative process and coming up with kind of off the wall ideas. And those are the kinds of things that make indie games really shine. So first, I wanted to talk about different ways to achieve variety, different ways, different reasons people come to your game, and why they stick with it. And the first and most obvious way is that you can have variety is through content. Like if you have a story or even multiple stories, if you have lots of levels or stages or puzzles or anything procedural generated can give you infinite content. And this is all focusing on new experiences, novelty, and maybe playing through the same content in different ways. This is pretty standard for most single player games, and most games are going to have some content. Uh, Other reasons people can play your games are people driven. If it's focused on multiplayer or community, and there's a real emphasis on interacting with one another, either in or even out of the game. Games like Pokemon can kind of spread uh, like rumors and ideas without having to actually play together, just because it's all kind of a shared experience through word of mouth. So so uh, games that aren't multiplayer can still have a huge community aspect and still be people driven in some respect. And then another broad category that you can have is being driven by challenges. Oh, by the way, I didn't have time to get pictures for all these, so I'm just using these beans pictures. I figured it'd be just as good. Um, but challenges like being the best out of everyone or trying to win or just prove yourself there's another good reason to have people stick with your game and stick with it as long as you can. Fighting games are a great example. High score games like Tetris are a good example. Dark Souls is an example. But it's important that this is all a spectrum. Fighting games have a big community aspect with it as well. Uh, Most games are going to have at least a little bit of each of these. It's hard to come up with a game without content. And game modes mostly fit within that kind of content sphere. So I wanted to zoom into game modes and talk a little at first about why you should have them. Content is mostly focused on novelty, so it kind of has a high uh, build-up cost where everything you build uh, might not be able to be reused as much, but it can create real diverse play experiences. Variety is the spice of life, and novelty value uh, can be really fun and refreshing, especially if it's like aside from the main game and you've just done a lot of the same thing for a while. Changing it up a bit could be very welcome. But also, depending on how the mode is, you usually won't need to reteach a whole bunch of new mechanics. Maybe just one or two things will change, and you just have to explain that. Players are already familiar with the core of the game and many of the objectives or rules, so it's very intuitive to them. Uh, and the things that stay the same are kind of anchor points that players can use to always reference about what isn't the same. Oop. Uh, Oftentimes, it can teach you skills that will reapply back to the main game, making you a better player or teaching you new things that you might not be aware of, but game modes can present a safe and dedicated way to explore that or figure it out specifically. It creates a kind of aha moment that is very valuable and very memorable for players. Maybe you find a big secret or a big combo. Oh, the gravity gun can also do this thing, and then you'll be able to use that as a tool in the future. Uh, it can also, I mentioned earlier, it can have like a high work cost because you might not be able to reuse things. But another way to do it is to have the player go through content you've already made, but in a different way. And in that way, you can kind of create content multiplicatively. Have this player go through the same level they've already been, but maybe they're missing a tool or are completely different. And this lets them see it in a different light, and they'll get impressed with how the same level has a completely different experience with these little changes. Shovel Knight does this a whole lot when you go through the same stages with different characters with different abilities. And lastly, they're just fun and really cool, and I like them, so you should too. It's so cool to see what kind of small changes, what the implications they have on the game in a larger sense. Mm. Uh, so also so that's all why you should implement them, but there's also different types of ones that you could make, and these will have kind of different difficulties to implement or to integrate. And so starting with just changing the objective, these ones are usually going to be the easier ones to bring in because you use what you already have. You can just slap on a couple of changes and to the end conditions or the measuring criteria, and that's all you need to do. In Portal, the first Portal, there are these really fun challenges where you try and speedrun different levels, or try and do it in as few portals as possible, or in as few steps as possible, which you're playing through the same levels, but the objectives are different. Your measuring criteria is different, and that completely changes the experience in a really cool and kind of mind-bending way. A classic example would be Tetris with the endless mode, or the 2-minute mode where you have to just go as fast as you can, versus the regular mode where you're trying to reach a score threshold. And those aren't really significant changes, but they can still create awesome, varied play experiences. But you can take it a step further and change kind of the rules of the games. If you play any games that have like a rotating Brawl of the Week format, like Hearthstone or something, then this is usually what it's going to be. It's going to change rules or add new rules to kind of mix it up. Maybe every round you summon a spider, or your health refills if you don't take damage or something, and it doesn't normally.
Hopefully won't have any more hiccups. So different types of... Another way you can do it is by kind of changing the rules, and this might be a bit more complicated than just changing how your success is measured, but if you work with it in mind, then you can pretty easily build around it, and there's lots of great examples where this can really shine. If you have a kind of rotating weekly game mode like card games or fighting games will usually have, this is going to be it. Maybe it's one-hit kills instead of hitting all the way down to 0, or it's every round you summon this unit which does something, but the goal is going to be still the same, to reduce the enemy's health to 0. Or maybe something like 2D versus 3D Sonic, where the goal is still reaching the end, but kind of the way you play is different. These are kind of maybe what you think of as traditional game modes, the different rules and different objectives, but you could also kind of have a total conversion where everything changes. This could be something like creative mode, where it's kind of just there's no objective and a lot of the rules are relaxed. It could be something that's completely off the wall, like a prop hunt, which if it's a mod for TF2 or Gary's mod. Instead of shooting people to try and win the game, it just completely changes it to a game of hide and seek, but it's still recognizably using some or the same systems from before. But it completely changes the light, and it's a complete overhaul of what the game is. These are really cool to see, but they're also the hardest to do because it takes the most work. And so, with these kind of categories, I have built up the definitive game modes alignment chart. You can see kind of how different ways of changing the rules or the objectives, as well as something I talked a little bit about in passing about kind of just how it's integrated. If it's just side content and it's just kind of an addition, or if it's using existing content, or if it's just kind of the variety and the changes are the whole reason you want to play. You know, Final Fantasy, any kind of MMO, your play experience is going to be a whole lot different if you're playing as a healer or a DPS or a tank. Super Mario 64, your objectives is kind of always get the star, but usually what you need to do in order to get that changes between level to level. What the Golf, if you're not familiar with it, it's a radical golfing game where pretty much every level has a different control scheme, but you're always just trying to get the golf ball or whatever else you are to the hole. Please do at me on this. It will boost my engagement. I will talk about this in the voice chat after this talk. Some considerations you want to have when making your game mode is you have to make sure you have a great core first. You can't just go willy-nilly creating all the game modes and then kind of making it better like I did. Because you'll run into things where you have to make changes later, or you get the fun part done and then you have to do all the rest of it. You just want to have it be as good and as replayable and as solid first, and then you can work on to do other things. You want to consider how much you want to do. If you want to focus on having a lot of diverse novel experiences versus a couple ones that are maybe safer but more replayable. Something like the Tetris game modes, which are just like regular, endless, timed. Those ones are pretty safe bets, but they also don't really change the core gameplay a whole bunch. Whereas something like fighting games will do, they'll usually have more radical changes. Like maybe instead of needs more. But it kind of depends on a couple factors. Yeah, if you want a more controlled experience, you want more novelty, more kind of gimmicks. But you can, if you work smart about it, it won't be too much overhead in order to make this new kind of content. There's always a cost of the content, but you can work smart to make it not as hard. Usually you'll want to have the rules be kind of clearly defined. You want the player to be able to know what the changes are to the game. You want them to know going in so they aren't confused about why does my gun suddenly shoot out bubbles instead of bullets. But in some cases, you might want to not explain it and just let the player figure it out on their own. It should be pretty clear what it is at that point, but it can create some real nice moments when you figure it out and have a real good time. This also ties into complexity. If you have a whole bunch of rules changes, then you probably are going to have to explain them. It'll be harder to figure out. But a lot of the times, if it's something like endless mode, the name is pretty much all you need. You don't need to really explain it more than that. Friendly fire, yeah, friendly fire is a good example. If you change the rules so that you can shoot your teammates, you're going to let them know, because else they'd be like, hey, why is my bro dead? And importantly, it all comes back to game feel. You want to think about how different game modes feel, how they feel to play, and how they feel in contrast to each other and versus other game modes. Kind of make sure each one is creating a kind of new play experience. This is something that is really benefited if you have a very strong vision of your game, and you can think about kind of what emotions you want people to feel at different times. And feeling, of course, ties into everything else about the game. It's something you should always be thinking about. And so, talking a little bit about Pushamo, which is what inspired all of this, is it has, I think it was 15 or 16 distinct game modes in it that are all kind of focusing on the new or novelty aspect of it, but I tried to make sure they were all still pretty distinct from each other. So some of them are pretty simple changes, like changing the dimension of a play space, having it be real cramped makes you kind of feel very panicky and maybe anxious about it. If it's two pieces at once instead of one piece coming, then it'll always kind of be more panicky. I like panic a lot, so I did that a couple times. But it could also be things like changing the pieces that show up, which is high in novelty. Instead of just the regular tetromino shapes, you're getting these pluses or these like big Z's or whatever else there is. Or something like a turn-based mode where it's just really slower and methodical. You can have kind of wonderfully weird and creative stuff that evoke these really cool emotions, and if you do kind of more drastic changes, you can kind of level these out a whole lot more. I've got some like Bullet Hell, which completely overhauls it from a Tetris shape mixing game to just kind of dodge with quick reaction kind of stuff. A Hydra fight where it just feels really crazy because you cut off a piece and two more come, and that makes it really hectic. I mentioned that I like hectic games. Or is this something like puzzle mode, which completely changes the objective, and again, another more slow and methodical and thoughtful experience. And if you're interested in buying Pushamo, then you can get it on its own for just $5, or it's in the Pico 8 Premium Bundle, which is going on for another 2 weeks, as well as you can play it in person tomorrow. I know I didn't show it off yet, and I'm just about out of time, but this is what it looks like. And it's really cool, and you should get it. And that's all the time I have, so thank you all for coming by. I will be in voice chat if you want to talk after this.
Thank you, Brooke. Brooke, great stuff. A lot of fun. Yeah, head on over to voice chat. A lot of good praise in the chat, so I hope folks will come on in and continue the conversation.